From scattered principalities beneath Mongol shadow, one city gathered threads, others abandoned. Moscow, patient and relentless. Across 5 centuries, that patience became empire. Ivan's terror forged autocracy. Peter's hammer bent tradition toward modernity. Catherine's ambition stretched borders from Baltic to Black Sea. Factories rose beside ancient monasteries. Railways crossed landscapes peasants walked for generations. Reforms arrived too late. When World War exposed every weakness, hungry cities, collapsing armies, a detached throne, crowds filled frozen streets demanding bread and dignity. The dynasty that survived Mongols, pretenders, and Napoleon dissolved in days, leaving an empire too vast to govern, suspended between collapse and transformation. Morning light often reveals more than it intends. When it rises over the forests and river bends of 15th century northeastern Rus, it falls across a land still scarred by long decades of tribute, shifting loyalties, and the memory of fires set by foreign riders. Yet in that pale light, something new begins to take shape. Not a triumphant rebirth, but a slow tightening of threads that once lay loose across fractured principalities. Far from the decaying influence of the old powers, a single city starts to gather these threads with quiet determination. Across wooded hills and marshy lowlands, messengers travel between towns whose pride once prevented even the smallest gesture of cooperation. Each carries a token, an order, or an invitation issued from a place many had once overlooked. Moscow was never meant to become the center of anything grand. It had no ancient pedigree like Novgorod, no vast merchant fleets, no position commanding the great southern plains. But it had something else, a resilience hardened by surviving the Mongol tempest, and an ability to bend rather than break. That instinct, once a sign of weakness, now becomes a strength as rival princes struggle to recover lost influence. While smaller courts debate, maneuver, or cling to fading privileges, the rising power by the Moskva River moves with purpose. Envoys arrive there daily, some out of hope, others out of fear, and many because they have nowhere else to turn. Inside the citadel, the ruling family weighs these arrivals carefully. Each petition, each oath, each appeal offers an opening. No gesture is wasted. The city refuses to grow by accident. It grows by intent. During these years, memories of Mongol dominance still shape every decision. The tribute caravans may have slowed, and the distant Khans may quarrel among themselves, but the shadow of that era lingers in every ruined village and every tax ledger beyond the forests. The Golden Horde struggles to maintain unity, its authority fraying along rival camps and restless successor states. What once seemed immovable begins to crumble, and Moscow watches closely. If the Horde weakens further, the balance of power across Russia's will transform almost overnight. New alliances emerge from this atmosphere of uncertainty. Some lords approach cautiously, offering cooperation so long as their personal freedoms remain untouched. Others try to resist, rallying around older centers of influence in Tver or Ryazan, hoping tradition alone can counter Moscow's growing reach. These attempts rarely last. A few seasons of poor harvests, a dispute over borders, or a skirmish along trade routes can shatter such fragile coalitions. Each collapse brings more territory under the steady hand of the ruling house in Moscow. Not far from the Kremlin walls, the city's markets swell with merchants who understand opportunity when they see it. Caravans from the Volga basin bring furs and wax. Traders from the north arrive with salt and fish. Craftsmen from distant towns seek the protection of a center that seems poised for permanence. The movement of goods mirrors the movement of allegiance. Where commerce flows, political influence follows. Alongside this economic rise, symbolic power grows as well. Chroniclers begin to reshape old stories, hinting that Moscow might stand not merely as another principality, but as a successor to realms long vanished monasteries. Commission icons, emphasizing continuity rather than loss. Clergy speak of a land meant to be restored, not fragmented. Though whispered at first, such ideas gain weight, with every fortress repaired and every neighboring territory incorporated. At the heart of these developments stands a leader determined to ensure that the city's ascent is not a passing moment. His decisions shape the rhythm of expansion, not through grand spectacle, but through persistent, measured pressure. When rival nobles argue among themselves, he waits. When disorder threatens to spill into the countryside, he steps in with just enough force to appear indispensable. And when the Golden Horde demands tribute, he answers with caution until caution no longer serves. This approach transforms the political landscape. Great families that once challenged Moscow's authority increasingly find themselves compelled to adapt. Some accept integration because the alternative is isolation. Others attempt resistance and discover that their once impressive fortresses matter little against an opponent who prefers patience over direct confrontation. Every season brings new negotiations, new settlements, and new frontier posts added to the expanding network of control. Far from the courts and chronicles, ordinary people experience these changes in subtler forms. Travelers report safer roads. Villages rebuild their wooden palisades, not in fear of Mongol raids, but in expectation of a more stable future. Young men summoned to serve in local militias now march under banners representing something larger than a single town. These shifts hint at the emergence of a unified identity, where once only loose kinship and regional loyalty existed. Yet the transformation is not without tension. Ambitious boyar families see their influence threatened by a centralizing authority that no longer tolerates independent power bases. Many protest that their ancestral rights are slipping away. Some retreat to distant lands, hoping to resurrect fortunes there. Others remain, attempting to negotiate new privileges within a changing hierarchy. Few achieve the leverage they once enjoyed. Authority steadily concentrates at the center, and the court in Moscow becomes the arbiter of disputes once settled by local lords. Beyond domestic struggles, the principality's geographic position begins to work in its favor. Located at the crossroads of forest and river routes, it can intercept traffic moving between northern trade hubs, and the Volga Basin fortifications built along these arteries serve not just as defenses, but as statements. This territory is no longer a patchwork of independent lands. It belongs to a unified realm. While Moscow strengthens internally, the Golden Horde continues to fracture. Rival khans issue contradictory commands. Tributary states test boundaries. Distant governors act independently. What was once a fearsome hegemon becomes a loose confederation of feuding leaders. Moscow measures each crack in that facade, seeking the precise moment when defiance will cost less than compliance. When that moment arrives, the city will no longer bow. Diplomacy plays a critical role in this delicate stage. Envoys travel to distant courts, forming marriages and alliances meant to enhance prestige. A particularly significant union links Moscow with a royal line claiming descent from a once mighty empire. Chronicles celebrate this connection enthusiastically, hinting that the city may now stand as guardian of traditions stretching back to classical antiquity. Whether these claims are literal or symbolic matters less than their political effect. Nobles across Rus understand the message. Moscow sees itself as heir to something greater, and soon the rest of the land must choose whether to follow. Within the city's fortified walls, construction projects accelerate. Brick replaces timber, towers rise higher, ramparts thicken. These improvements signal both confidence and preparation. If Moscow intends to stand independent of any foreign lord, such defenses will prove essential. Craftsmen labor throughout each season, reshaping the skyline so thoroughly that returning travelers often describe it as an entirely new city. Even religious authority begins to shift. Clerical leaders gravitate toward Moscow's protection, sensing that the spiritual direction of Rus's might soon align with its political center. Monasteries across the countryside rely increasingly on Moscow's patronage. This strengthens the principality's influence while giving it a moral legitimacy that rivals can scarcely match. The voice of the church becomes another pillar supporting the city's ambitions. Tension eventually reaches a peak when the ruling house in Moscow decides the time has come to stop sending tribute. It is not announced with fanfare. The refusal is deliberate and quiet, but its implications echo across the steppe. No longer will the city act as a subordinate. With that single gesture, centuries of submission begin to dissolve. Riders dispatched from the remnants of the horde may demand compliance, yet they now face a principality fortified, confident, and ready to test its strength. The years that follow are marked by confrontations not only along borders, but within hearts and minds. For many across Rus, the idea that one city could lead the entire land still feels improbable. But each victory lends credibility. Each rival subdued reinforces the impression that history is rearranging itself around a new axis. By watching opportunity and seizing it at every turn, Moscow transforms from a survivor of past devastation into the architect of a future empire. This rise does more than reshape borders. It alters expectations. No longer do the people of Rus resign themselves to fragmented rule or foreign dominance. Now they witness a city capable of challenging both. From its stronghold of rivers, forests, and faith, Moscow steps forward not as a claimant seeking approval, but as a leader demanding recognition. In this shifting world, the ascent of the principality is neither sudden nor accidental. It grows through persistence, calculation, and a vision of unity born from centuries of division. The land that once bowed under distant rule now begins to imagine a different destiny, one centered around a city whose ambitions have only just begun to unfold. Dawn breaks over the white-stoned cathedrals of Moscow, yet the city does not feel settled. Its towers stand higher, its walls thicker, its banners more confident than ever before. But behind that rising strength lies a court tightening. With unease, power has moved decisively toward the center, and the memory of refusing the horde's tribute still ripples through every corridor. Victory brought unity, but unity demands something greater, a figure capable of holding this expanding realm together. In the chambers where nobles gather, one name dominates every whisper, though few dare speak it loudly. The heir is still a child, yet the realm already senses that his reign will test the limits of what a single ruler can become. Inside the Kremlin, guards and attendants move with unusual care. The boy who will inherit Moscow's growing authority watches everything. He is quiet, observant, and restless, in ways that unsettle the great families surrounding him. When envoys kneel, he notices who lowers their eyes and who hesitates. When the clergy bless him, he listens to every word. Through the windows, he sees a city reshaped by ambition. Fortified walls, swelling markets, and churches rising in stone rather than timber. All of it stands as a promise he is meant to fulfill. Around him, court factions shift like shadows. Some nobles hope to guide the young heir gently, controlling him through alliances and favors. Others fear what a concentrated throne might become and attempt to hedge their power, strengthening private armies or forging secret agreements in distant towns. Their maneuvering creates an atmosphere of tension beneath the polished ceremonies of the palace. Despite their efforts, the boy grows surrounded by examples of strength, not hesitation. Priests speak of a divinely protected realm. Generals boast of victories, and chroniclers craft stories hinting that destiny itself leans toward Moscow. As the heir enters adolescence, these influences deepen. Tutors teach more than letters and scripture. They teach the responsibilities of rule. He studies accounts of princes who failed through weakness and rulers who succeeded through decisive action. History becomes a mirror in which he sees not caution but expectation. All around him, authority settles more heavily upon his shoulders until the line between personal will and state necessity begins to blur. When he finally stands before the assembled nobles to claim his title, the hall falls into a rare silence. No ruler before him has taken on the mantle he now demands. By calling himself Tsar, he reaches beyond local traditions, asserting a role meant to echo the great crowns of distant lands. Those present understand exactly what this means. Moscow will no longer be one principality among many. It intends to stand as the head of a unified realm. The declaration is bold, but the moment also reveals how fragile the court's balance has become. Some nobles bow quickly, eager to align themselves with rising authority. Others comply outwardly, but stiffen with alarm. The centralization that once seemed distant now confronts them directly. A coronation strengthens this shift. Ceremony fills every corridor with incense and chanting as clergy anoint the new ruler with symbolic oil. From that moment forward, he carries a new identity, not simply as leader of a principality, but as the embodiment of a realm gathering itself into something larger than any single dynasty or city. His youth does not diminish the power of this transformation. Instead, it heightens the intensity of those early years, when ideals mix with ambition and the lines between justice and dominance grow increasingly thin. Few could have predicted how rapidly the throne would act. Once the initial rituals end, the ruler begins reshaping the court with startling speed. Advisors who once guided his upbringing find themselves sidelined. Old rivalries between noble houses are broken apart before they can consolidate decisions. Once debated among councils now come directly from the Tsar, carried across the land by mounted messengers who speak in his name alone. Villages, towns, and fortresses learn to expect these commands, adjusting their daily rhythms to the will of a ruler determined to strengthen his grip on every corner of the realm. Far from the capital, banners gather along the Volga. The state's ambitions no longer stop at consolidating Rus. New horizons call, vast and untamed, holding strategic value and immense symbolic weight. Along the riverbanks, preparations begin for campaigns that will define the shape of the young ruler's authority. Veterans recall earlier conflicts with steppe kanates and frontier towns. They recognize the moment and understand what it demands. If the realm wishes to prove itself on the world stage, it must extend beyond the forests and rivers that nurtured it. The movement toward the south and east grows steadily. Armies march past settlements where children watch the columns with wide eyes, already sensing that the campaigns ahead will echo through stories for generations. Every mile they advance pushes Moscow deeper into contested lands, regions long influenced by successor states of the Mongol world. The confrontations that follow are fierce, driven by a desire not merely to conquer territory, but to break a legacy that once kept all Russes under foreign command. When the walls of Kazan rise before the army, the confrontation becomes more than a military contest. The siege represents a symbolic threshold between the past and a new era. Months pass as the ruler coordinates assaults, fortifies positions, and encourages engineers to devise methods to fracture the city's defenses. The river reflects the fiery glow of night attacks and the thunder of early artillery. Soldiers endure hunger, disease, and freezing winds, yet the determination of the commander never wavers. Eventually, the walls fall, and victory reshapes the entire region. The realm gains access to new steppe routes, fertile lands, and a significant population that now stands under the Tsar's authority. The triumph at Kazan fuels further ambitions. Astrakhan soon follows, completing control over the lower Volga and positioning the state to influence distant trade systems stretching toward the Caspian Sea. These conquests bring new cultures, new faith communities, and new administrative challenges under Moscow's control. They also solidify a crucial message. The realm is no longer confined by its forested origins. It has stepped into the broader world, and its appetite for expansion has only grown. But victories bring consequences. As the state expands, so does the ruler's sense of personal responsibility. The demands of governing such diverse lands push him toward methods harsher than any used before suspicion begins to fester at court. Concerns arise over whether distant nobles truly support his vision or merely pretend out of necessity. The Tsar's mistrust turns inward, and the shifting loyalty of powerful families becomes a source of sleepless nights and volatile decisions. In this climate of fear, a new institution emerges, one meant to cut away disloyalty and strengthen obedience. Its riders dress differently, live apart from the city's traditional aristocracy, and carry a mandate shaped by both fear and loyalty. As this force spreads across the realm, noble estates tremble. The Tsar's intention, at least in its earliest conception, may have been to protect the throne, remove treachery, and safeguard recent conquests. But the result soon grows far beyond strategic necessity. Raids multiply, accusations spread. Entire communities face scrutiny based on whispers and rumors. Families long tied to Muscovy's history see their lands confiscated or destroyed. Peasants watch as the old noble order fractures under the weight of sudden terror. This campaign reshapes the social landscape. Some nobles embrace humiliation in hope of survival. Others disappear into distant forests, taking followers with them. Towns once vibrant grow quiet, as residents fear even speaking the names of those who have fallen out of favor. The line between justice and vengeance blurs until the ruler himself begins to fear the very atmosphere he created. Yet even as internal turmoil spreads, the realm remains vast and formidable. Its armies dominate the steppe. Its traders move goods along river networks stretching into new lands. Its clergy proclaim the unity of faith across territories never before imagined under a single crown. The autocracy, for all its darkness, has completed a phase of consolidation unmatched in Russia's history. Still, the strain shows. Years of relentless campaigns, internal purges, and personal tragedy culminate in a ruler haunted by loss and suspicion. His later decisions waver between fierce determination and unstable doubt. When he dies, the realm does not collapse immediately, but the foundation beneath its throne trembles. Succession becomes a dangerous puzzle, contested by factions that were once tightly controlled. The wounds caused by years of terror have not healed, and they weaken the structures he spent so long building. As the ruler's body is carried through the streets, people watch with a mixture of fear, exhaustion, and hope. Some mourn a leader who expanded their realm beyond all prior boundaries. Others breathe cautiously, wondering if the land might finally exhale. But the struggle for stability has only begun. Without a clear successor capable of holding together the vast territory he assembled, the realm stands on the edge of a crisis that will test every achievement of the previous decades. What follows is not immediate collapse, but a slow unraveling, one that will plunge the land into uncertainty and allow foreign powers, once humbled, to return with renewed ambition. The autocracy born in these years has reshaped the state forever, and the consequences of its extremes will soon sweep across the entire realm, leading directly into the turmoil that awaits in the next chapter. Wind drifts over the towers of Moscow, carrying a stillness that feels unnatural. After years of expansion, terror, and forceful reforms, the great city finds itself without the commanding presence that once imposed fear and obedience on every noble court. The throne stands technically occupied, yet no one truly governs. This vacuum settles over the land like a winter fog, heavy, quiet, and full of threat. People sense it before they speak of it. The realm that once marched boldly across the Volga now struggles to take a single step in unison. Inside the Kremlin walls, confusion spreads as different factions attempt to control the young and fragile successor. Advisors jostle for access to the throne room. Boyar families argue over orders, each insisting their guidance reflects the late ruler's wishes. Their quarrels expose deep fractures, long hidden by the shadow of autocratic authority. One moment, nobles attempt cooperation. The next, they sabotage each other's influence. Only a few had imagined how swiftly unity could dissolve once the iron grip vanished. Beyond the capital, regional lords read these signs with unsettling clarity. Garrison commanders hesitate when receiving commands, unsure which faction issued them. Local governors strengthen private militias, fearing that their neighbors might seize the moment to settle old scores. Even the clergy, long accustomed to clear lines of authority, struggle to determine which declarations carry the weight of the Tsar and which come from ambitious courtiers seeking temporary advantage. The uncertainty spreads outward, town by town, until the entire realm feels unmoored. In distant villages, rumors move faster than official messages. Farmers whisper that Mongol-descended powers to the south might return. Traders from the Volga claim rival cities prepare their own bids for supremacy. Some swear that divine punishment has fallen upon the land for the excesses of the previous era. Others insist that hope still remains, if a strong heir survives long enough to mature. Each rumor grows with every retelling, creating a sense of unease that no proclamation from Moscow can dispel. Hunger soon compounds the political confusion. A string of poor harvests hits the countryside, leaving families to stretch dwindling stores through long winters. Grain that once flowed freely into the capital now moves hesitantly, guarded by nervous militias, unsure if their shipments will reach their destination or be seized along the way. Markets shrink, prices rise, people grow desperate. This strain weakens loyalties that once held firm despite hardship. When survival becomes uncertain, obedience becomes optional. While ordinary people suffer quietly, factions in the capital escalate their struggles. From gilded chambers to shadowed corridors, alliances shift almost daily. One Boyar family appears dominant one month. In the next, it has been pushed to the margins by rivals using marriage pacts or strategic intimidation. The throne itself becomes a prize, not a sacred center. Fragile rulers take their place on it, only to be manipulated by whichever court clique controls the surrounding guards. Each new arrangement lasts just long enough to deepen the chaos. Far from the palace, ambitious men notice an opportunity. Some claim distant kinship with the royal line. Others rely on the power of foreign patrons. They step forward not quietly, but with fanfare, presenting themselves as rightful heirs sent to rescue the realm from misrule. At first, local nobles laugh at such pretenders, but as famine worsens and the court's indecision spreads, laughter fades. A charismatic claimant carrying a convincing story, a well-timed bribe, or a small but disciplined army can sway desperate communities. One contender appears, proclaiming himself a son of the former ruler and demanding allegiance. His arrival throws border regions into turmoil. Some towns welcome him, believing his claims. Others close their gates. The response is uneven, but the effect is immediate. Confidence in Moscow's authority wavers, and with it, the unity of the entire realm. Another pretender soon follows, then another. Each one arrives backed by noble sponsors who see a chance to restore their own power by placing a pliable figure on the throne. Conflicts erupt across the countryside as different communities choose sides. Some choose out of conviction, others out of fear, and many simply because one army reached their gates before another. These confrontations bring more devastation than political clarity. Villages burn, crops wither in fields abandoned by terrified peasants. Roads become dangerous, patrolled by opportunistic bands who pledge loyalty only to themselves. The chaos invites foreign attention. To the west, a powerful commonwealth sees the turmoil as an opening to expand influence. Noble elites there argue over the best way to exploit Moscow's misfortune. Some propose negotiation, others demand intervention, and still others insist on supporting a pretender of their own choosing. The idea takes hold that placing a friendly figure on the throne could reshape the entire balance of power across Eastern Europe. Soon foreign-backed armies cross the border. They enter not with stealth, but with confidence, expecting swift compliance from fractured regions. Some nobles welcome them eagerly, believing outside aid is the only path to stability. Others resist fiercely, convinced that allowing foreign soldiers into the heartland would doom the realm entirely. Their resistance, however noble, rarely holds long. Where unity once existed, division now reigns. The capital reacts with shock as word spreads that foreign troops have approached major towns along the western frontier. Leaders scramble to issue decrees urging resistance, yet these orders reach regions already under new control. Panic seeps into the court. Some schemers argue that accepting a foreign prince might end the suffering. Others insist that surrender would destroy everything Moscow fought to build. Their debates grow heated, each one revealing how little remains of the old authority. Among the people, anger replaces confusion. They have endured famine, lawlessness, and endless fighting among nobles whose ambitions seem limitless. What began as political disorder now feels like a national crisis ripping through every layer of society. Peasants armed with farm tools join local defenders. Towns attempt to form militias to protect their markets. Clergy preach unity, urging the people not to let the land fall into complete ruin. These local efforts inspire hope, but they struggle to counter the scale of the chaos. Meanwhile, foreign-supported pretenders enter the capital under heavy guard, hoping to claim the throne. Their processions move through streets filled with wary eyes. Some citizens watch with resignation, others glare with defiance. None can be sure whether the new arrival will restore stability or deepen the crisis inside the Kremlin. Those loyal to Moscow's independence maneuver quietly, planning how to resist under the new circumstances. Not far away, factions gather to debate resistance. Merchants want secure roads. Clergy want peace. Soldiers want clear command. Gradually, these groups discover a shared purpose. The realm must free itself of foreign influence before it can heal. This growing sentiment takes root beyond the capital, spreading through towns weary of endless claims and counterclaims. Communities begin organizing, not around any pretender, but around the simple idea of restoring order on their own terms. A spark ignites this growing resolve. In one city after another, groups of citizens rise against occupying forces and foreign-backed claimants. Their actions are far from coordinated, yet they show a pattern. People have reached their breaking point. They want their land governed by those who share their hardships, not by strangers or nobles seeking advantage. These uprisings start small, a militia gathering outside a town gate, a band of defenders ambushing a supply convoy. But they send a message powerful enough to echo across the realm. Foreign forces respond quickly, but their confidence falters. What they expected to suppress with ease becomes a stubborn resistance. Every mile of conquered territory demands garrisons and provisions. Every village reclaimed by local defenders threatens to unravel their plans. The cost of maintaining influence grows heavier, while their own nobles question how much longer such interference is worth sustaining. Back in Moscow, leaders who once struggled to agree on anything find themselves pushed together by necessity. They watch as resistance movements expand and realize that the moment requires unity, not intrigue. Some still hold ambitions of personal power, yet they understand that without a legitimate leader to rally around, the realm will fall apart completely. Thus, a rare meeting takes place, one that gathers representatives from multiple factions to discuss how to save the land from total collapse. Their debates stretch long into the night. Voices rise, accusations fly, and old grievances resurface. Yet beneath all the tension lies a shared truth. No claimant backed by outside armies can truly lead the realm. Only someone chosen from within, by those who still believe in the idea of a unified people, can restore order. For the first time in years, a path forward begins to take shape. The crisis that tore through the land has forged a common understanding. The throne must be filled not by force, but by agreement. From this decision emerges the first glimmer of hope, a fragile but unmistakable light cutting through the years of uncertainty. That light grows as word spreads that a council will gather to choose a new ruler. Across towns and villages, people listen with cautious optimism. After years of famine, war, and foreign influence, the realm finally prepares to reclaim its future. What comes next will not be simple, but it will be theirs. Smoke still lingers over towns recently reclaimed by their own inhabitants, but for the first time in years, that smoke signals rebuilding rather than destruction. Roads that once carried foreign-backed claimants now echo with the footsteps of armed volunteers returning to their homes. Guided not by a pretender's banner but by a collective desire to restore the realm's dignity, whispers of a gathering in the capital travel from mouth to mouth. A great assembly where different voices will decide who must lead the country out of chaos. After endless uncertainty, people cling to this news with something close to hope. Inside Moscow, preparations unfold at a tense pace. Representatives from every corner of the realm arrive on worn horses, bringing accounts of ruined villages, plundered churches, and families scattered by the turmoil. Many come exhausted, yet all understand the gravity of the moment. Their task is to choose a ruler who can unite the land, not simply reign above it. In old halls lit by winter candles, They gather to assess the landscape left behind by years of famine, invasion, and civil war. The first discussions are fraught with suspicion. Some delegates arrive wary of hidden agendas. Others fear that powerful boyar families will attempt to steer the decision toward their own interests. But as accounts of suffering multiply, burned harvests, fatherless children, towns buried under snow without enough food to survive the season, the arguments shift. Choosing a ruler becomes less about lineage and more about survival. The land needs someone untainted by factional betrayals, someone whose family name does not reignite old feuds. Among the many names suggested, one begins to stand out for reasons that have little to do with ambition. It belongs to a family known neither for cruelty nor opportunism, a family whose past loyalty to the realm is remembered, but whose recent years have been marked more by suffering than by intrigue. Their kin have been persecuted, imprisoned, and scattered during the upheaval. This history grants them something rare: sympathy from nearly every group present. When the assembly discusses this possibility, arguments quiet. Even rival factions accept that such a figure might unify rather than divide. Far from these debates, in a quiet monastery, surrounded by snow-laden pine forests, the young man at the center of this growing consensus lives unaware of the weight soon to fall upon him. His family sought refuge here after being driven from their lands during earlier purges. Monastic bells mark his days, not political ambitions. He spends his time in prayer, study, and simple labor, believing the turbulence of the realm to be a distant storm he cannot influence. Yet life beyond these walls has begun shaping itself around his name. Back in the capital, the assembly reaches a decision. When the chosen messenger rides through freezing winds toward the monastery, the entire realm seems to hold its breath. The young man receives the news with astonishment. His first instinct is refusal. He has known only hardship and silence, not command. The monks urge him to accept, reminding him that the realm needs someone who can bring healing rather than further conflict. After long hours spent in solemn contemplation, he agrees, not out of ambition, but out of duty. His journey to Moscow becomes a procession of weary hope. Villagers gather to watch him pass, offering bread, salt, or prayers. Mothers lift their children so they can see the man who might finally end the hardship they have endured for so long. Soldiers who once fought in scattered militias now form a protective guard around the sleigh, carrying him northward, recognizing that stability hinges on his safe arrival. When he enters the city, the streets fill despite the biting winter. People climb onto walls, rooftops, even bare tree branches to witness the moment he carries no aura of conquest. Only humility and an earnest seriousness that contrasts sharply with the chaos of recent years. This modest presence reassures the crowd more than any grand procession ever could. For the first time in a long while, the realm sees a ruler whose authority stems not from fear or force, but from collective desire. Ceremony follows, though it carries less extravagance than coronations of the past. Even so, the solemn chanting of priests and the ringing of bells reverberate across the city, signaling a new era. With his acceptance of the throne, the realm finally has a recognized figure at its center, someone whose lineage links him to earlier rulers, yet whose youth offers a chance for renewal. Reconstruction begins immediately. The young Tsar listens carefully to advisors from different regions, recognizing that the land's wounds are too wide for one perspective to heal. He orders envoys to survey damage in every province. Granaries are reorganized so that surplus grain can be moved to starving communities. Trade routes long disrupted by conflict start to reopen as soldiers clear forests, rebuild bridges, and fortify vulnerable stretches of road. These practical efforts may not carry the drama of military campaigns, but they hold the realm together more effectively than any display of power. Relations with the great noble families demand delicate handling. Many fear retribution for their previous allegiances. Instead of punishment, the new ruler extends offers of reconciliation, asking only that they pledge loyalty to the realm's stability rather than to private ambition. Most accept gratefully, relieved to avoid the cycle of vengeance that devastated their peers. Their cooperation becomes essential in restoring local governance and maintaining calm in border regions still shaken by hunger and unrest. Beyond political realignment, the economy requires urgent attention. Fields burned during invasions must be replanted. Mills destroyed by raiders need rebuilding. Artisans who fled during the turmoil are invited back with promises of protection. Towns along the Volga and Dnieper begin trading again, ferrying timber, grain, fish, and furs across waterways that now flow freely once more. Markets grow lively as merchants return from exile. Tents are raised along riverbanks, and the clatter of wagons echoes between repaired wooden houses. Slowly, life begins returning to a land that almost tore itself apart. Churches reopen with renewed congregations. Children who spent their earliest years surrounded by fear now play along thawing streets. Festivals revive cautiously, their music and dancing reminding people that joy can exist even after prolonged despair. Though scars remain, they no longer define every corner of daily life. Still, danger persists. Foreign powers that recently meddled in the succession continue to eye the realm with interest. To counter this, the Tsar focuses on securing borders. Fortresses along western frontiers receive new garrisons. Defensive lines near river crossings are reinforced. Ambassadors negotiate truces with neighboring states to prevent further interference while the realm recovers. These measures buy precious time for reconstruction, ensuring that the fragile peace built within the borders is not shattered by outside ambitions. Meanwhile, policies aimed at stabilizing the countryside reshape village life. Because many farms were abandoned during the conflict, land ownership laws must be clarified. The Tsar institutes measures meant to tether nobles and peasants more firmly to one another, ensuring that agricultural production resumes without endless disputes. While these reforms do not remove hardship for common people, they provide consistency, something desperately needed after years of unpredictability. These early successes allow the realm to breathe more freely. As seasons pass, the young ruler's reputation grows. Chroniclers describe him as patient, steady, and conscientious, qualities that contrast with the extremes of previous rulers. Whatever his personal limitations, he seems committed to rebuilding a land that has repeatedly teetered on the brink of destruction. His humility becomes a stabilizing force that draws scattered communities back into coherence. Cultural life also begins to stir again. Monasteries recover lost manuscripts and resume scriptoria work. Icon painters return to their craft. Storytellers travel from village to village recounting how people resisted foreign domination and reclaimed their future. These tales shape a renewed sense of shared identity, a belief that the realm owes its survival not to a single hero, but to the collective resilience of its people. Yet stability requires more than recovery. It requires continuity. Advisors discuss how to prevent future succession crises. Dynastic stability becomes a guiding priority. The Tsar's family, once only known as victims of political persecution, now stands at the center of the realm's future. Their modest origins, compared to powerful boyar clans, end up working in their favor. Few fear that they will revive the old rivalries that nearly destroyed the state. Instead, their name comes to symbolize a fresh beginning. Gradually, foreign rulers recognize that Moscow has reasserted itself. Envoys from neighboring courts arrive offering trade agreements and diplomatic assurances. Some express surprise that a realm so battered could restore itself so quickly. The response they receive is confident yet measured. The land has endured centuries of trials, and endurance remains its greatest strength. By the end of this period, the realm stands transformed. It has weathered invasion, famine, false claimants, and internal betrayal. It has reclaimed its autonomy. It has chosen a ruler not through force, but through collective necessity. And under that ruler's steady hand, it has begun rebuilding the foundations upon which a future empire will eventually rest. As spring returns once more, and river ice breaks apart in drifting slabs, the land looks ahead. Nothing remains simple, and dangers still gather beyond the forests. But the realm has regained direction, unity, and purpose. Storms may come again, yet for the moment, the country stands healed enough to imagine a broader horizon. A period of reform, ambition, and sweeping transformation that will push the realm from fragile recovery into the path of empire. Across the river towns of the realm, life gradually settles into patterns that feel familiar again, yet something beneath the surface has changed. Recovery has brought stability, but stability alone cannot sustain a state that has endured famine, invasion, and internal collapse. Administrators traveling through distant districts send reports to the capital, describing shortages of trained soldiers, outdated fortifications, and borderlands vulnerable to outside pressure. These warnings do not go unnoticed. The ruling court, strengthened by years of cautious rebuilding, understands that the realm now stands at a crossroads. Continue as a recovering kingdom, or take the first steps toward becoming something larger. Between emerging trade routes and old military posts, murmurs spread about the realm's neighbors. To the northwest, a powerful kingdom hardens its stance, preparing fleets and armies capable of striking deep into contested territories. To the south, long-standing rivalries simmer as border raids increase unpredictably. In the west, a vast commonwealth still weighs its influence. Remembering how recently it placed claimants on the Moscow throne, pressure tightens from every direction, reminding the leadership that the countryside's calm is fragile and temporary. Peace may hold for now, but the political winds beyond the forests grow restless. Inside the capital, younger nobles gather around maps, aware that the old military structure cannot withstand the challenges forming beyond the horizon. They have grown up hearing stories of the chaos that nearly destroyed the land. Now they want to ensure such a disaster never returns. Their discussions focus on modernizing forces, strengthening fortresses, and reorganizing command structures. Although many elders resist, arguing that tradition should not be discarded, it becomes increasingly clear that tradition alone cannot defend a realm surrounded by rivals refining their own strategies. Messages from frontier governors reinforce this urgency. Reports detail skirmishes along river crossings, raids by steppe riders testing northern defenses, and merchants complaining of convoys halted by weak patrols. These encounters are small, but their frequency signals a shift. Outside, powers sense an opportunity. They saw the country fractured once. They wonder if it might fracture again. That suspicion alone is enough to spark concern at court. While military issues rise to the forefront, cultural tensions quietly reshape the realm from within. Clergy warn about a growing influence from lands to the west, where scholars debate new ideas about governance, warfare, and society. These ideas travel along the same trade routes that now connect the realm to foreign merchants. Artisans carry new techniques back home. Foreign workers settle in major cities, and coastal towns hear rumors of inventions capable of reshaping entire armies. Some nobles dismiss these influences as passing fashions, but others recognize their potential. If neighboring realms adopt these new methods, while Moscow clings to old forms, the consequences could be disastrous. Amid this climate of uncertainty, the court turns its attention to the heir who will eventually guide the realm through whatever storms arise. He is still young, but his curiosity sets him apart. He studies documents on fortification design, foreign naval construction, and the structure of armies beyond the steppe. He asks questions that unsettle older generals. Why do our troops still rely on outdated formations? Why do our ships lag behind the designs of foreign fleets? Why do our diplomats write to other courts in the same style used decades earlier, when the world around them has changed so rapidly? His instructors struggle to answer without revealing their own discomfort. Some fear that such curiosity may challenge established norms. Others see it as the exact quality needed for a realm seeking to avoid stagnation. Regardless, the young heir begins forming his own vision for the future, one driven not by nostalgia for the past, but by a desire to place the country among the powerful states of Europe. As he matures, this vision takes clearer shape. Advisors watch him study captured weapons, questioning their construction. He spends long hours observing foreign craftsmen in the capital's workshops, listening to them argue over engineering methods unfamiliar to local artisans. At times, his fascination appears excessive, but those closest to him sense that he is not simply curious. He is preparing. Beyond the walls of the Kremlin, merchants create a new rhythm along the Volga. Goods flow from inland forests to trading posts farther south. Salt caravans connect with river fleets carrying grain, furs, and metals. This movement not only strengthens the economy, but also increases contact with foreigners who arrive with specialized skills. Among them are shipbuilders, fortification engineers, and metallurgists who hint at techniques capable of transforming the state's defenses. These specialists speak of a world where wealth and power no longer come only from land and serfs, but from skilled labor, disciplined armies, and modern fleets. Some nobles fear these foreign workers, seeing them as threats to tradition. Others welcome them, recognizing that the realm must adapt or risk being overshadowed. As their debates intensify, the young heir follows the arguments closely. He rarely intervenes, content for now to observe which figures cling to the past and which embrace change. Meanwhile, news arrives that war has broken out between powerful states to the west. Maps are redrawn almost yearly, as shifting alliances reshape the continent. Emissaries returning from foreign courts bring stories of rulers who reorganize their armies with discipline unseen in the steppes, who construct fleets capable of controlling entire seas, and who reform their administrations to strengthen central power. These accounts ignite both anxiety and ambition in the young heir. If the realm wants to survive among such rivals, it must learn from these changes rather than isolate itself. Pressure grows even without external war. Along the northern borders, skirmishes with a rising power remind everyone that long-term peace is fragile. Farther west, a state known for its cavalry traditions keeps a wary eye on Moscow's recovery. South of the steppes, distant khanates hold their ground, but weaken under internal divisions. Every direction presents either danger or opportunity, depending on how boldly the realm acts. Inside the capital, a small circle of advisors meets regularly with the heir, reviewing these developments. Each meeting further convinces him that the realm stands on the edge of transformation. The old systems will not suffice. New approaches must take their place. But modernizing a country with deep-rooted customs requires delicate handling. Too much change risks rebellion. Too little invites foreign conquest. The balance is precarious. Despite these challenges, the heir grows more determined. He visits river ports to inspect shipyards. He orders artisans to demonstrate foreign tools and demands explanations for why local techniques fall short. He walks through armories, comparing old weapons to imported designs. In discussions with generals, he asks pointed questions about logistics, drilling practices, and battlefield organization. Some officers bristle at such scrutiny, but others quietly admit that the younger mind sees weaknesses they long ignored. Not far from the capital, elite units train with renewed intensity. These drills test formations, firing methods, and coordination. Previously neglected commanders report their findings to the heir, who studies each detail with unwavering focus. He seems to be waiting for a catalyst, an event dramatic enough to justify sweeping reforms, yet contained enough to avoid widespread collapse. That catalyst comes in the form of a challenge from a formidable neighbor to the northwest. Tensions along their shared frontier escalate as disputes over territory grow sharper, raids increase. Diplomatic exchanges become colder, each message carrying an undercurrent of threat. Observers in the capital note that this rival has already embraced new methods of warfare, blending disciplined infantry with powerful artillery. Any confrontation will expose the realm's outdated systems with brutal clarity. Rather than step back, the heir sees in this rising threat a test, a chance to demonstrate his emerging leadership. He begins preparing personally, taking part in exercises and studying engineering manuals brought by foreigners. His determination unsettles some nobles who fear the consequences of provoking such a dangerous rival. Yet others find his boldness invigorating. They have long wished for a figure capable of seizing opportunity rather than reacting to crisis. As messages from frontier commanders grow more urgent, the heir recognizes that the realm's future will be shaped not by caution, but by decisive change. He has studied foreign innovations, learned from trade networks, examined rival armies, and observed the fragility of peace. Now, all those threads converge. Transformation is no longer a distant idea. It is a necessity. By the time the crisis along the border reaches a peak, the court no longer debates whether change is needed. The only question is how far the new ruler will go once he assumes full power. And as he steps into that role, with enemies massing beyond the forests and allies uncertain in distant courts, the realm prepares to follow a leader whose vision reaches far beyond its traditional boundaries, a leader who intends to reshape not just armies or cities, but the very foundation of the state. Across the corridors of power, the shift becomes unmistakable the moment he takes full command. Advisors accustomed to slow deliberation suddenly face a ruler who refuses to observe tradition from a distance. He does not inherit a stable realm. He seizes a project. Everything, armies, laws, workshops, shipyards, even manners, becomes subject to his pace. One order follows another before the ink on the previous has dried. In the barracks outside Moscow, the earliest changes appear. Soldiers wake to unfamiliar drills taught by instructors brought from abroad. Commands are given in rhythms the veterans find strange, with emphasis on discipline rather than brute force. Officers who once relied on noble birth to assert authority must now prove their competence. Those who cannot adjust quietly fall from favor and find their regiments reassigned. Meanwhile, the ruler's attention shifts toward the water. Rivers that once carried only trade now host ship frames rising from muddy banks. He spends long hours among the builders, sleeves rolled up, hammer in hand. Foreign shipwrights argue over keel alignment and mast placement while he listens closely, asking questions that leave them surprised at how quickly he grasps the craft. His presence turns shipyards into laboratories of change, and soon local craftsmen begin adopting methods they once dismissed as foreign novelties. Inside the administrative chambers, the overhaul is just as intense. Offices that operated through vague custom now receive structured roles. Councils that once debated endlessly are replaced by departments assigned to specific tasks: taxation, justice, foreign affairs, military supply. These shifts unsettle elite families who controlled bureaucratic influence for generations, but the ruler presses forward. He believes clarity of responsibility will strengthen the state more than preserving traditions that favor a handful of households. Beyond the capital, rumors spread about a coastal settlement rising on land few considered usable. Marshes choke the area, storms batter its shores, and disease spreads quickly. Still, the ruler insists the location is essential for the future. Stone foundations sink into the mud. Wooden frameworks crowd the shoreline. Cannons are hauled into newly built forts. Workers curse the endless moisture, yet the project expands rapidly. The new settlement is not meant to serve the present. It will be the entry point into a world the realm has never fully joined. Diplomats traveling through Europe begin to notice the change. Letters from foreign courts describe a new type of negotiator sent from Moscow, one who understands naval strategy, artillery production, and modern warfare. Envoys who previously dismissed the realm as peripheral now speak carefully, aware that they face a state undergoing rapid transformation. Some try to slow its rise, others seek its partnership. Either way, the shift is acknowledged. Tension along the northwestern frontier grows at the same pace as the reforms. The rival kingdom across the sea, known for its fierce cavalry and bold commanders, watches with unease as fortresses along the border expand. Its young monarch believes his own armies unbeatable and views the realm's modernization with a mixture of suspicion and pride. When war finally erupts, it does so with a confidence he does not hesitate to display. The first clash is brutal. Despite new drills and reorganized command structures, the realm's forces struggle against an opponent who has trained for this style of warfare for generations. Lines break. Regiments falter. The ruler watches the defeat unfold with an expression that mixes anger with grim determination. He does not hide from the failure. He studies it. Officers who survived are questioned about every misstep, every hesitation, every flaw in their approach. No detail goes unexamined. From that moment, the reforms intensify. Training becomes relentless. Artillery foundries work through the night. Supply chains are reorganized so that ammunition, food, and horses reach the front on time. Commanders who once hesitated now understand that their ruler will accept nothing short of competence. Slowly, the army begins to change. Regiments that once relied on individual bravery learn to fight as coordinated units. Cavalry becomes more disciplined. Siege engineers refine their methods. As the army improves, the new city on the coast expands into a naval base capable of outfitting fleets. Warships launched from its docks begin patrolling waters, once dominated entirely by foreign vessels. These ships are not mere symbols. They carry crews trained under the ruler's direct supervision. Naval officers study foreign manuals, learn tide patterns, and practice coordinated maneuvers. When these vessels engage the enemy on open water, the world witnesses something unheard of. a fleet from the east capable of standing against a seasoned maritime power. Far from the battlefield, the ruler presses another reform that reshapes society itself. Noble families are ordered to educate their sons in arithmetic, fortification design, and navigation. Dismissed initially as an eccentric demand, it becomes a requirement for holding office. Knowledge becomes a path to advancement, cutting through the old hierarchies that once rested solely on birth. This change infuriates many, but the ruler is unmoved. Control over the church undergoes an equally dramatic shift. Instead of allowing a single high clerical figure to operate independently, the ruler reorganizes the institution under state oversight. He sees religious authority not as a counterbalance to the throne, but as an essential part of state development. This consolidation provokes quiet resistance from conservative clergy, yet the new structure holds. With the church aligned under his reforms, he gains the ideological support necessary to push the realm toward modernity. Battles along the northwest continue, but the balance begins to tilt. The reorganized army performs with precision unimaginable years earlier. They conduct winter marches across frozen terrain, execute sieges with coordinated artillery fire, and repel cavalry charges that once seemed unstoppable. The ruler personally rides to the front, inspecting trenches and guiding engineers. His presence inspires soldiers and terrifies commanders who know mistakes will be scrutinized with exacting attention. When a decisive confrontation finally arrives, both armies understand that the outcome will reshape the future of Northern Europe. The rival kingdom commits its elite troops, confident in their reputation. The reorganized army meets them with measured volleys, unwavering formations, and tactics honed through years of reform. As the hours pass, momentum shifts. What began as a contest becomes a turning point. When the enemy lines break and retreat, the victory signals the end of their long dominance. Diplomats across Europe react immediately. The victory elevates the realm from regional power to rising empire. Courts that once ignored its interests now scramble to form alliances or countermeasures. The new city on the coast becomes the imperial capital, symbolizing a shift from tradition to ambition. Administrative reforms continue even after victory. Provinces are reorganized into units with clearer responsibilities. Tax systems are recalibrated to support standing armies. And naval construction's new institutions arise dedicated to science, engineering, and exploration. The ruler establishes schools to train officers, engineers, and civil servants. These foundations outlast his life, ensuring that modernization remains embedded in the state structure. Despite these achievements, the ruler's final years are marked by exhaustion and relentless effort. He pushes projects forward even when illness slows him. He inspects shipyards during harsh winters, meets foreign envoys at dawn, and dictates orders deep into the night. No one around him doubts his devotion to reshaping the empire, though many worry that his pace cannot be sustained indefinitely. When he dies, the state he leaves behind is unrecognizable compared to the one he inherited. A modern army stands ready at its borders. A navy guards its coast. A new capital connects the empire to the wider world. Nobles educate their children according to new standards. Administrators operate within structured institutions rather than vague custom. And an empire, not merely a realm, emerges on the European stage. The transformation is complete, but the question now turns to endurance. Can the system he built survive without his relentless oversight? The next chapter begins with that uncertainty hanging over the empire, its future balanced between newfound strength and the challenges of succession. The news of the emperor's death travels through the northern capital, with a shock that leaves the city strangely muted. Workshops slow, Officers pause mid-command, and administrators gather in uneasy clusters, unsure how the government will function without the relentless drive that shaped nearly every corner of the state. For decades, a single will had directed the empire's growth. Now the country must learn to govern without that force pressing against it every day. Inside the administrative chambers, officials sift through unfinished plans. Some projects are recorded only in short notes, others in detailed sketches, and still others exist only as half-spoken intentions remembered by a handful of ministers. No previous ruler left behind such a sprawling transformation. The empire suddenly faces the challenge of turning constant motion into sustainable structure. Outside the capital, the reaction is mixed. Border commanders worry about foreign opportunists. Provincial governors fear losing direction. Merchants hope for stability after years of rapid reform. Farmers, who bore the burden of new taxes and conscription, wonder whether the next ruler will ease the demands placed upon them. Everyone senses that the empire is entering a delicate phase, and no one knows whether the momentum of past decades will continue or collapse. Choosing a successor proves more complicated than anyone admits publicly. The previous reign disrupted traditional expectations, leaving the line of inheritance unclear. Rival factions within the capital seize the moment, each pushing forward their preferred candidate. Court families debate at private dinners, generals whisper to their regiments, and foreign envoys attempt to gauge which faction will prevail. No group has enough power to decide alone, which forces alliances that shift from week to week. In the end, the throne passes to a figure acceptable to enough factions to prevent immediate conflict. The new sovereign inherits a powerful empire, but not the authority required to command it effortlessly. Every step must be taken cautiously. Ministers study the mood of the guard regiments. Nobles watch for signs of favoritism, and the general public waits to see whether reforms will slow or accelerate. Early decisions reveal a cautious approach. The new ruler supports many of the late emperor's military and administrative changes, but avoids the extremes that made court life so volatile. Reforms continue, but at a steadier pace. Departments reorganize their workflows, and several long-delayed projects gain the stability they lacked under constant inspection. This shift helps the government find a workable rhythm after years of breathless acceleration. Even with this progress, tension simmers beneath the surface. The Imperial Guard, empowered by its role in determining succession, begins to see itself as a political actor rather than a protector of the throne. Officers argue over promotions, loyalties, and the boundaries of their influence. Court ministers grow wary of relying too heavily on the guards, knowing that any misstep could spark unrest among units stationed so close to the capital. Beyond the palace walls, expansion continues. Explorers, traders, and soldiers push deeper into the vast eastern territories, establishing outposts far from established cities. These ventures rely less on the dramatic gestures of the previous reign and more on steady, methodical progress. Forts rise along major rivers, supply routes are charted, and small settlements grow into permanent communities. Each new outpost strengthens the empire's reach, while avoiding unnecessary conflict with local populations. On the empire's western border, diplomacy becomes the preferred tool. Rival powers watch closely, aware that the transition between rulers could leave weaknesses to exploit. The new sovereign answers these concerns by reinforcing frontier garrisons and maintaining consistent relations with neighboring courts. Instead of bold military moves, the empire relies on predictable negotiations, making it clear that it will defend its territory, but will not seek large-scale war while internal adjustments continue. Cultural developments shift as well. Artists and architects receive steady patronage, encouraged to refine the new capital's appearance. Buildings that once rose under rushing schedules now gain ornamentation and careful design. Scholars revisit the educational institutions created during the previous reign, improving curricula and training methods. Subjects once considered radical become standard fields of study for young nobles, especially engineering, navigation, and the sciences. During these years, the court strives to balance tradition with innovation. The nobility, long accustomed to privileges passed through lineage, must accept new expectations placed upon them: military service, education requirements, and administrative responsibilities expand. Some embrace these changes, seeing them as necessary for maintaining the empire's strength. Others resist quietly, hoping to restore the old order. Their disagreements never disappear, but the ruler's steady governance prevents them from erupting into open conflict. Meanwhile, the new capital along the northern sea continues to grow. Its location, once criticized as impractical, becomes an asset. Ships arrive from distant ports, diplomats travel through its streets, and manufacturers establish workshops that supply both army and navy. The city evolves from a symbol of ambition into a functional administrative center, linking the empire to Europe. Several rulers come and go during this period, each shaped by the challenges of inheriting a state built by force of personality rather than institutional tradition. Some reigns are short and chaotic. Others bring calm and order. The empire learns to adapt to these changes, developing internal mechanisms that allow it to function even when leadership shifts unexpectedly. Ministries expand their responsibilities, the army strengthens its command structures, and the court becomes more adept at managing transitions. One reign in particular introduces a renewed sense of consolidation. The ruler encourages religious, cultural, and military institutions to work in harmony. Rather than compete for influence, state councils gain clearer authority, and the practice of relying on a single dominant figure begins to fade. Instead, the empire starts to resemble a complex but coordinated system in which multiple voices shape policy, though the throne remains the final arbiter. Even so, uncertainty never fully disappears. Factions continue to maneuver behind the scenes, each hoping future successions will favor their interests. Guard officers still whisper about choosing rulers, though their influence varies with each reign. Noble families build alliances through marriages, land grants, and military appointments. The capital remains a place where fortunes can rise or fall quickly, depending on which court group gains the upper hand. Yet despite these tensions, the empire continues to grow stronger. Its borders remain secure, its institutions gain structure, and its economy stabilizes. Trade expands along rivers, through forests, and across new settlements. The eastern frontier pushes steadily toward the Pacific, drawing settlers, hunters, and soldiers deeper into lands once known only from travelers' tales. By the time this period draws to a close, the state has accomplished something rare. It has survived the loss of a transformative ruler without losing direction. It has not matched the explosive energy of the previous decades, but it has consolidated gains, solidified institutions, and created conditions that allow future rulers to shape the empire further. Ahead lies a reign that will push these developments to their limits. A sovereign whose ambition matches the scale of the empire itself, and whose decisions will leave lasting marks on both court and frontier. The palace does not erupt when the shift in power occurs. Instead, a quiet certainty settles over its halls. Servants continue their routines, ministers exchange carefully measured greetings, and guard officers stand watch with an alertness sharpened by recent events. Everyone present senses that a new figure has stepped into authority, not through chaos, but through coordination among individuals who concluded that the realm needed a different hand on the throne. Her ascent begins long before the final moment. As a young consort, she entered the court with limited influence, observing more than she spoke. Over the years, she learned the personalities who shaped daily decisions, who sought prestige, who feared scandal, who maneuvered for military appointments, and who clung to older traditions. By understanding these motives, she positioned herself among allies who valued stability and competence over erratic leadership. Once in power, she moves decisively. Her first actions are not sweeping reforms, but careful adjustments that signal continuity to the broader population. Orders are issued affirming loyalty to the army, the church, and the nobility. Frontier commanders receive reassurance that military supplies will continue without interruption. Provincial governors are reminded of their responsibilities, while being encouraged to report local concerns directly to the capital. These gestures create an atmosphere of calm, even as deeper changes begin to take shape within the palace. Inside her council chambers, discussions shift quickly from crisis management to development. Advisors debate new trade routes, agricultural policies, and legal reforms. Many bring up issues that had lingered unresolved through previous reigns, often overshadowed by court disputes. She listens closely, prioritizing matters that promise long-term benefits, reorganizing provincial administration, improving correspondence between distant regions, and expanding educational opportunities for both noble families and promising commoners. At the same time, she understands the value of visibility. Public appearances are planned strategically. She attends religious ceremonies, presides over military reviews, and meets with representatives from frontier communities. Each event serves as a reminder that the throne is stable and actively engaged. Her presence signals not only authority, but also a willingness to shoulder responsibility during a period when Russia's influence among European powers is growing rapidly. In the capital, building projects accelerate. Architects and artisans receive commissions for theaters, academies, and public buildings meant to display the empire's cultural ambitions. These structures transform the city into a center of sophistication comparable to major European capitals. Foreign travelers remark on the energy of the place, its wide avenues, its illuminated halls, and the sense that something modern is taking root in a land often dismissed as distant and archaic. Her interest in education is not limited to grand academies. She promotes the establishment of provincial schools, encouraging the training of administrators, surveyors, and medical practitioners. By improving literacy and technical knowledge, she hopes to create a class of officials able to govern remote districts effectively. This effort, though ambitious, makes gradual progress and becomes one of the most recognizable features of her domestic agenda. Court culture undergoes a transformation as well. Writers, painters, and scholars receive patronage, attracting talent from within the empire and from abroad. Debates on philosophy and governance circulate within select circles, broadening the intellectual environment of the capital. Translations of foreign works appear more frequently, and discussions about natural rights and legal codification reach the desks of her legal advisors. She carefully examines these ideas, adapting those that align with the empire's needs while discarding proposals she considers impractical or destabilizing. Beyond cultural reforms, her foreign policy demands constant attention. The empire's expansion under earlier rulers created a series of tense borders. Especially in the south, rival powers monitor her decisions closely, expecting hesitation after the leadership change. Instead, she strengthens the empire's position through a combination of diplomacy and force. Negotiators are instructed to pursue favorable treaties, while generals receive firm orders to protect frontier settlements. Military campaigns soon follow. Along the southern frontier, years of intermittent conflict escalate into open warfare. Commanders mobilize regiments across the steppe, advancing towards strategic river crossings and fortified positions. Her involvement in military planning, though mostly through correspondence, shapes the overall direction of the campaigns. She demands clear objectives, consistent supply routes, and detailed reports, practices that reduce the disarray often seen in earlier wars. Victories along this frontier shift regional power. Key strongholds fall after prolonged sieges, granting the empire access to new territories and vital ports. These gains reshape trade routes and give Russian merchants access to markets once controlled by rival powers. Diplomatic observers across Europe recognize that the empire has strengthened its influence considerably. Some courts respond with congratulations, others express concern. Either way, the balance of power has changed. Another major opportunity emerges to the west. A neighboring commonwealth faces internal turmoil. Weakened by political paralysis and disputes among its magnates, foreign powers, including Russia, see a chance to secure influence over its future. Through agreements with allies and coordinated military pressure, the empire participates in a series of territorial divisions that reduce the Commonwealth dramatically. These actions expand Russian control deeper into Eastern Europe, bringing new populations under imperial administration. Although these territorial gains elevate the empire's status, they introduce substantial challenges. New lands require governance, infrastructure, and legal clarity. Local elites must be integrated or replaced. Diverse populations, often with their own languages, faiths, and customs, must be managed carefully to avoid rebellion. Her administration works to balance these demands, relying on both coercion and accommodation. Back in the capital, the court reaches its greatest influence. The Imperial Guard enjoys unmatched prestige. Foreign ambassadors compete for her attention, and noble families build intricate alliances through marriage, service, and patronage. Yet even during this period of grandeur, caution guides her decisions. She remembers that sudden changes of fortune have overthrown rulers before her, and she governs with a blend of confidence and vigilance. Despite the elegance of public ceremonies, tensions lurk beneath the surface. Some nobles resent her rise, believing their own families deserved greater recognition. A few officers question the reforms imposed on the army. Peripheral regions, distant from the stability of the capital, respond unevenly to new laws. She manages these conflicts through diplomacy, when possible, and swift punishment when necessary. Her focus on legal codification becomes one of the defining features of her rule. She seeks to modernize the empire's legal framework, inspired partly by Enlightenment thinkers she encountered through correspondence drafts, circulate through various committees. Some propose sweeping changes meant to equalize legal categories. Others adjust specific administrative procedures. Although not all proposals become law, the process reveals her desire to create a more coherent system that can support a growing empire. By the final years of her reign, the transformation is visible everywhere. The empire's borders stretch farther than ever before. The capital has become a cultural hub. Administrative institutions function more predictably. The nobility, though still powerful, operates within clearer expectations. Foreign courts treat Russia as a major power, not a peripheral actor. Her rule reshapes the empire's identity. It becomes simultaneously European in culture and uniquely Russian in ambition. It embraces intellectual currents from abroad while maintaining an iron grip on domestic authority, and it strengthens the very structures that future rulers will depend upon and struggle against. As her era closes, the empire stands larger, richer, and more confident, yet also burdened by the administrative and social complexities of its rapid expansion. The next century will bring pressure, reform, resistance, and new challenges that test the limits of what she built. Signals of approaching change ripple through the empire, long before anyone can name the source. Envoys on distant roads report new alliances forming across Europe. Border commanders sense rising tension, and merchants traveling between capitals hear stories of ideological shifts unsettling old certainties. These scattered impressions eventually converge into a single conclusion. The 19th century will not allow Russia to remain merely a spectator. Forces gathering beyond its frontiers demand engagement, adaptation, and, above all, clarity of purpose. In the capital, a new ruler ascends with a determination shaped by both hope and hesitation. His early years on the throne are marked by curiosity about reform and an eagerness to reshape administrative routines. Ministers introduced proposals for limited modernization, focusing on education, financial organization, and military readiness. None of these changes challenge the empire's foundations, yet together they signal a desire for more efficient governance. Those ambitions, however, unfold against a backdrop of shifting European politics. Revolutionary ideas spread across courts and cities. Unsettling monarchs who fear their influence, border states reorganize their armies. Long-standing rivalries reawaken. In this environment, Russia must choose its position carefully. Remaining isolated is impossible. Acting rashly would risk unnecessary war. While political ministers debate internal reforms, frontier generals grapple with more immediate concerns. Military reports describe weaknesses inherited from earlier conflicts: cumbersome supply routes, uneven troop training, and outdated logistical practices. Officers propose improvements drawn from foreign manuals, hoping to modernize regiments without provoking conservative backlash. Drill instructors adopt new tactics cautiously, testing formations on parade grounds before integrating them into regular service. Efforts to refine the army are interrupted by a crisis that sweeps Europe into upheaval. A powerful military leader from the West embarks on a campaign to dominate the continent, overturning governments and redrawing borders. His armies move with astonishing speed, forcing Russia to face a choice it had tried to delay. Diplomatic negotiation fails, and the empire enters a war unlike any it has faced before. Initial operations appear manageable. Russian forces advance into contested regions, pushing enemy detachments back and disrupting supply lines. Yet the invading armies respond with devastating efficiency. Battles erupt across Central Europe, each one revealing the enemy's tactical mastery. After several costly engagements, Russian leaders decide to withdraw deeper into their own territory, drawing the enemy farther east. As foreign troops press into the empire, communities along the invasion route prepare to resist. Rural populations evacuate livestock and supplies, leaving nothing that could sustain the enemy roads become clogged with refugees. But their determination stiffens local militias and inspires regular troops. City councils organize defenses, monasteries convert halls into hospitals, and merchant guilds raise funds to support regiments on the march. Retreat is not surrender. Commanders understand the advantage of space vast distances that stretch the enemy's lines thin. As the invaders move deeper, their logistics falter. Messages fail to arrive on time. Foraging becomes impossible. The early momentum that carried them across Europe weakens under the weight of winter, hunger, and exhaustion. Within the capital, the ruler maintains a steady presence. He refuses to flee, urging resilience and unity. His orders reinforce key defensive positions, coordinate militia activity, and gather reserves behind strategic river lines. Ministers who once debated minor reforms now work tirelessly to secure grain, horses, and medical supplies. The enemy's advance has unified the court in a way no policy ever could. When the campaign reaches its turning point, it does so quietly. The invaders, unable to hold their ground, begin a long retreat across the same lands they once crossed triumphantly. Russian forces, revitalized by the shift in momentum, pursue them relentlessly. Each skirmish pushes the enemy farther west. Each victory strengthens the empire's resolve. What began as a desperate defense transforms into a sweeping counteroffensive. As the war spills back into Central Europe, Russian armies fight alongside Allied forces to dismantle the enemy's coalition. Battles rage through snow-covered plains and fortified cities. Commanders adapt quickly, using lessons learned earlier in the campaign to coordinate infantry, artillery, and cavalry with growing precision. Months of grueling conflict finalize the enemy's collapse, and the continent begins drafting terms for a new order. Russia emerges from the conflict with immense prestige. Its armies played a decisive role in the victory, and its ruler now stands among the most influential figures in Europe. Courts across the continent send envoys seeking alliances, trade agreements, and assurances of friendship. Diplomatic gatherings convene to determine new boundaries and political arrangements, and Russia's voice carries significant weight. Yet victory brings challenges. Territories devastated by war require extensive rebuilding. Veterans return to villages in need of assistance, and widows flood church offices seeking support. The cost of the campaign strains the treasury, forcing officials to revise taxation and cut unnecessary expenditures. Even the army, celebrated for its achievements, must confront the wear inflicted by prolonged conflict. Despite these burdens, the post-war years give the empire new influence. Russian diplomats play key roles in shaping continental agreements meant to prevent further upheaval. Several smaller states look to Russia for guidance or protection, viewing it as a counterweight to Western powers. This period of diplomatic prominence, though welcomed by many, creates tension between those who favor continued expansion abroad and those who believe attention should return to internal development. Inside the empire, noble expectations rise. Many officers who fought in the war now seek reforms matching the sacrifices they endured. They argue for modernization of legal codes, more consistent administration, and greater clarity regarding the rights of various social classes. These proposals, however, collide with conservative factions that fear losing traditional privileges. The tension between these groups shapes court politics long after the canons fall silent. Meanwhile, rural life remains largely unchanged. Serfs continue working under obligations that tie their lives to the estates of noble landlords. Tax collectors arrive with regularity, and recruitment officers continue selecting young men for military service. Although victory brings pride, it does not alter the deep social divisions that define the countryside. Writers, officials, and some military veterans begin discussing these divisions more openly, hoping for gradual reform, but their calls are met with caution. Along the western frontier, the empire gains new responsibilities. Territories altered by the post-war settlements require careful oversight. Governors must integrate diverse populations, speaking different languages and practicing different faiths. Roads must be rebuilt and markets reopened. These tasks stretch administrative resources, highlighting inefficiencies that predate the war. Inside the capital, the ruler wrestles with competing impulses. On one hand, he desires reform that could strengthen the empire further. On the other, he fears that rapid change might trigger unrest similar to the revolutions that plagued Europe. His policies reflect this tension. Some ministries gain new authority, but major structural adjustments are postponed. He chooses predictability over innovation, hoping the empire can maintain stability through cautious governance. Diplomatic influence peaks during this era. Russia participates in congresses, negotiates peace terms for neighboring states, and acts as a mediator in disputes far from its borders. This prominence reassures allies, but unsettles adversaries. Western powers watch Russia's growing involvement with suspicion, fearing the emergence of a dominant force capable of shaping the continent's future. By the later years of this reign, the empire finds itself in a state of equilibrium. Its armies are respected, its diplomats consulted, and its ruler viewed as a central figure in European politics. Yet beneath this surface, contradictions accumulate. The prestige of victory masks internal stagnation. Ambitious officers grow restless. Intellectuals criticize outdated laws. Peasants face worsening conditions. The empire seems larger and stronger than ever, but its foundations show signs of strain. These contradictions set the stage for a generation, defined not by triumph, but by confrontation between reform-minded elites and a system unwilling to change quickly. The next chapter will erupt from that tension, a clash between ideals and authority that will challenge the empire more deeply than any foreign war. Years after the empire's triumph over its Western adversary, confidence still radiates from the official portraits hanging in government chambers. Generals speak proudly of past victories. Diplomats recall their influence at great congresses, and courtiers point to the ruler's prestige across Europe. Yet outside those polished rooms, a different conversation begins to take shape, one born from frustration rather than pride. Officers who marched through foreign capitals return to an empire that feels unchanged, rigid, and unwilling to match the sacrifices they made. Young nobles raised on stories of battlefield heroism now sit through stifling bureaucratic routines, convinced that the state must evolve or risk stagnation. In the southern barracks and western garrisons, whispers of reform spread among educated officers. Many studied abroad, learned foreign languages, and absorbed ideas circulating in European academies. Some believe constitutional limits on the monarchy would strengthen the empire. Others envision a code of rights or a representative council. None advocate rebellion outright, yet their discussion signals a shift in expectations. The ideals they debate collide sharply with the rigid autocracy that defines their homeland. Those conversations eventually reach the capital. Reports of small gatherings among regiments trouble the government. Ministers urge the ruler to address the officers' concerns, but he remains committed to a vision of authority built entirely on discipline and obedience. He tightens censorship, expands police networks, and reinforces the principle that the empire must be guided from the top without interference. Despite these measures, dissatisfaction continues to grow. When a group of high-ranking officers decides to act, their plan lacks cohesion, yet they share one conviction: the empire needs a different course. On a winter morning, as snow settles over the streets leading to the Senate Square, they step forward, hoping to force a change of government. Their expectation is that sympathetic regiments and citizens will join them. Instead, confusion spreads, orders contradict one another, and the uprising falters almost immediately. Soldiers loyal to the crown surround the square, and the confrontation ends abruptly. The consequences are swift. Trials follow, sentences are severe, and the rebels become symbols for a generation that felt stifled by the system authorities' intensify surveillance, convinced that further unrest may erupt if left unchecked. The event does not topple the empire, but it reveals fissures that cannot be ignored. Beneath the ruler's strict governance lies a society increasingly aware of its own contradictions. During the following decades, the autocracy hardens. A vast bureaucracy expands to enforce order. Police departments monitor universities, salons, and printing houses. Censorship offices review manuscripts line by line, fearful that even simple criticisms could spark unrest. Yet this tightening grip does not break society's desire for discussion. It only pushes debates into private homes, letters, and small circles hidden from official scrutiny. As political pressure increases, military engagements continue on the empire's fringes. Campaigns in the Caucasus become long, grinding conflicts fought across mountains and valleys, unfamiliar to commanders trained on flat terrain. These expeditions demand enormous resources and expose soldiers to resistance that grows more determined each year. Victories come slowly and at high cost, drawing the empire deeper into a region that resists easy subjugation. Amid these challenges, industrial and technological changes sweep across Europe. Railways lengthen trade routes, steam engines reshape manufacturing, and foreign countries reorganize their armies to match new capabilities. Inside Russia, however, the pace of development remains uneven. Factories appear in a few growing cities, yet vast regions continue to rely on outdated methods. Administrators argue about how to encourage economic progress without empowering groups that might challenge the autocracy. Writers and thinkers begin exploring these contradictions in their works. Some publish historical studies to avoid censorship, while subtly criticizing the present. Others turn to fiction, creating characters whose struggles reflect broader social tensions. Their stories circulate widely, often in hand-copied manuscripts passed from reader to reader. These voices spark discussion far beyond the capital, reaching provincial towns, merchant households, and officers stationed on remote frontiers. Meanwhile, pressure builds among the peasantry. Serfs remain bound to estates, expected to fulfill obligations that leave them little opportunity to improve their lives. Population growth strains agricultural land, causing disputes between landlords and tenants. Local officials struggle to mediate, and resentment grows. Although these tensions rarely explode into organized rebellion, they persist as a constant undercurrent shaping rural life. When the empire enters a major international conflict in the mid-century, these internal weaknesses come into sharp relief. Senior commanders confront an enemy coalition that fights with modern equipment, reliable supply lines, and efficient coordination. Russian forces, vast in number but unevenly trained, struggle to match this level of organization. Supply shortages plague operations. Roads through contested territories slow artillery movement. Medical services strain under the weight of casualties. Reports from the front reach the capital and dispel illusions of strength. Newspapers, restricted though they are, cannot hide the scale of the disaster. Letters from officers describe inadequate logistics, outdated fortifications, and confusion among commanders. The sense of national pride that once united the empire after earlier victories now gives way to frustration and disbelief. The ruler, usually steadfast, begins to grasp the magnitude of the crisis. Advisors urge reforms that could strengthen the state: modern transportation networks, new administrative bodies, and improved oversight of military supply. Yet these proposals clash with entrenched practices and the fear that any admission of weakness might fuel internal opposition. The government hesitates, attempting to repair systemic issues without altering the system itself. As defeats accumulate, dissatisfaction spreads among nobles, merchants, and peasants alike. The war drains resources and exposes the empire's vulnerability. Soldiers returning from the front describe conditions that shock their families: shortages of boots, rifles shared between men, and commanders unable to coordinate reinforcements. Many families mourn losses that seem senseless, and support for the war declines sharply. In the aftermath of the conflict, the ruler faces a choice between suppression and reform. Recognizing that the war revealed deep structural problems, he chooses to modernize. His decision surprises conservatives, but it reflects a recognition that the empire cannot maintain its global standing without changes to its internal systems. The most dramatic reform concerns the abolition of serfdom. Landowners receive compensation, while former serfs obtain limited freedom and the right to own property. The process is complicated and often contentious, but its intent marks a profound departure from centuries of social hierarchy. Reform committees struggle to define obligations, land allotments, and local governance structures. Although imperfect, the change signals a move toward a more mobile and productive rural society. Additional reforms follow. Local assemblies gain authority to handle certain administrative tasks. Judicial procedures become more standardized, aiming to reduce arbitrary rulings. Military service reorganizes to improve readiness. Schools expand in number, attracting students who previously lacked access to education. Yet even as these reforms take shape, resistance emerges. Landowners complain they lost workers without receiving adequate support. Peasants discover that new freedoms come with heavy financial burdens. Intellectuals argue that the changes do not go far enough. Revolutionary groups form in secret, believing incremental reform cannot address the empire's deeper problems. Tension reaches a breaking point when a radical group targets the ruler himself. A series of attacks culminates in an explosion that claims his life. The event shocks the empire, erasing any sense that careful reform alone can diffuse growing unrest. Crowds gather in squares to mourn, yet beneath the grief lies an unmistakable fear. The empire has stepped into an era where violence, ideology, and repression will compete for dominance. The next ruler inherits a transformed yet unsettled state, one that has abolished an ancient system, modernized its administration, and fought bitter wars, yet still feels divided by expectations it cannot fully meet. Ahead lies a period defined by consolidation, reaction, and the mounting pressures of industrialization. Factories begin rising along riverbanks where water wheels once powered small mills, and their tall chimneys send new shapes into the sky. These buildings signal a shift deeper than smoke or noise. They represent the arrival of an era the empire can neither avoid nor fully control. Workers stream into expanding districts, drawn by wages that promise opportunity but often deliver hardship. Streets once quiet at dusk glow with lanterns from workshops that operate day and night. Industrialization enters the empire unevenly, yet decisively, reshaping daily life faster than policies can adapt. Inside the capital, a new ruler assumes power burdened by the memory of his predecessor's violent end. His first acts prioritize security. Police departments receive broader authority. Investigators track political circles with renewed intensity. and newspapers face stricter oversight. He believes stability requires vigilance, especially as radical groups celebrate the recent assassination as proof that the old order can be challenged. Advisors echo this view, arguing that firm measures will discourage further violence. While political control tightens, economic development accelerates. Investors from both inside and outside the empire pour money into ventures connected to ironworking, coal extraction, and textiles. Merchant families expand into banking, lending capital to ambitious factory owners. Cities that once served primarily as administrative centers become industrial hubs filled with smoke, noise, and restless ambition. Workers arrive from villages in such numbers that municipal authorities struggle to provide housing, sanitation, and basic services. Life inside these rapidly growing districts carries its own struggles. Long workdays, meager pay, and unsafe conditions dominate the experience of laborers' families, occupy overcrowded apartments. Illness spreads quickly through cramped neighborhoods. Mothers and children join the workforce out of necessity, leaving villages short of essential labor. Though officials receive reports describing these hardships, responses remain cautious. Many higher authorities believe intervention might slow industrial growth, and growth is seen as essential for strengthening the empire. On the railways, locomotives cross vast distances at unprecedented speed. Tracks knit together regions once isolated for months during winter. New lines carve paths through forests, across plains, and over river valleys. These connections change everything. Soldiers can be deployed rapidly, goods reach markets cheaply, and ideas travel farther than sensors can reliably intercept. Train stations become symbols of progress, bustling with traders, pilgrims, and travelers heading toward unfamiliar cities. Within government ministries, debates intensify. Some officials argue that the empire must adapt its administrative structure to match the pace of industrial change. Others insist that altering long-standing institutions would weaken central authority. These disagreements stay mostly behind closed doors, yet they shape the direction of policy attempts at moderate reform emerge. But each one meets resistance from groups convinced that change will undermine tradition or threaten stability. Rural communities feel these shifts even from a distance. As factories lure workers to towns, villages must reorganize agricultural labor. Landowners worry about losing their workforce, while peasants burdened by taxes hope industrial wages might offer a path toward better lives. New farming equipment reaches the countryside, though its expense limits its use. Agricultural committees propose modernization, but progress remains slower than in the cities. Still, the countryside senses that time is moving differently now. Old rhythms no longer match the needs of a nation rushing into modern industry. Amid industrial expansion, political movements take root. Workers gather in tea houses, factories, and boarding rooms to discuss wages, hours, and safety. These conversations drift toward broader subjects: representation, rights, and the accountability of those in power. Young organizers distribute pamphlets despite the risk of arrest. They speak about dignity, equality, and reform, resonating with people who feel their voices absent from official channels. The police crack down, but suppression only strengthens determination in some circles. Students join these discussions with energy. Universities become battlegrounds of ideas. Lectures on economic theory, political philosophy, and foreign revolutions attract students hungry for purpose. Small groups meet in dormitories to debate reforms, often blending idealism with anger. Professors sympathetic to these sentiments risk dismissal, yet their influence lingers in the minds of their students. Government officials grow increasingly wary of these institutions, recognizing the threat posed by a generation unwilling to accept inherited structures unquestioned. In the capital, the ruler observes these developments with rising concern. His advisors urge stricter laws, arguing that leniency invites chaos. He responds with measures designed to reinforce central control: expanded secret police operations, prohibited gatherings, and new restrictions on publications. Yet every attempt to tighten security highlights how deeply industrialization has transformed society. Workers now number in the millions. Students communicate across regions. Railways disperse ideas too quickly to contain. Control becomes more difficult, even as punishments grow harsher. Along the empire's southern and eastern frontiers, new threats emerge. Nomad confederations challenge outposts, insurgents resist occupation, and rival empires seek influence in contested territories, rich with resources. Commanders dispatch battalions to reinforce forts and secure trade routes, but these deployments strain the treasury. Military modernization becomes urgent, pushing ministers to request more funds for rifles, artillery, and rail construction to supply distant garrisons. Inside the barracks, officers train soldiers in updated tactics influenced by foreign manuals. Shooting ranges expand. Field exercises grow more complex. Engineers experiment with new equipment and fortification methods. These efforts progress unevenly. Some regiments modernize quickly, while others remain trapped in outdated routines. Yet the shift toward contemporary warfare becomes impossible to ignore. Military leaders worry that without consistent investment, the empire could fall behind adversaries advancing at a rapid pace. At court, noble families debate what these changes mean for their position. Some see opportunity in industrial investment, purchasing shares in rail companies and factories. Others fear losing influence as merchants, bankers, and industrialists gain wealth and visibility. Their unease shapes court politics, influencing appointments, petitions, and alliances. Ministers must balance the interests of a rising commercial class against those of landowning nobles, essential for rural stability. In provincial towns, a new middle class emerges. Shopkeepers, clerks, engineers, and teachers occupy a space between nobles and peasants, shaping local culture and expectations. They read foreign newspapers, participate in municipal councils, and seek broader representation in decision-making. Their aspirations unsettle authorities accustomed to a simpler social hierarchy. What once was a state defined by nobles and peasants now hosts a growing number of educated citizens demanding recognition. Meanwhile, the ruler grows increasingly convinced that traditional methods alone cannot hold the empire together. Conversations with advisors turn toward cautious reform. He authorizes commissions to study judicial procedures, administrative organization, and economic policy. These commissions issue reports detailing inefficiencies and proposing improvements. Some suggestions move forward. Others stall due to resistance from conservative factions. Reform proceeds, but slowly. Too slowly for many who feel time slipping away. Railways continue expanding, regardless of political hesitation. Lines link agricultural regions with industrial centers, creating a national market that never existed before grain travels to ports at unprecedented speed. Coal shipments fuel factories far from mining districts. The empire begins to experience economic integration, though uneven development widens the gap between advanced cities and rural provinces. Many observers sense an impending confrontation between modern forces and traditional authority, even if few can predict its form. Radical groups grow bolder, Some plotting violent acts to force change. Police officers uncover cells scattered across major cities, yet new ones form as quickly as others are dismantled. Underground printing presses distribute manifestos calling for revolution, constitutional reform, or national liberation for various ethnic groups within the empire. Inside the Winter Palace, the ruler faces a dilemma with no easy solution. He fears that yielding to reformers could invite instability, yet he recognizes that suppressing all change will only deepen resentment. His decisions reflect this internal conflict. 1 month brings concessions, the next brings renewed crackdowns. The inconsistency fuels uncertainty, leaving society unsure whether negotiation or resistance will define the future. Factories continue expanding, railways continue lengthening, and cities grow louder with each passing season. Every new workshop adds to the empire's economic potential and to its social complexity. For a state accustomed to rigid hierarchies, these changes feel both promising and dangerous. The energy of industrial growth carries a force that even the most powerful rulers struggle to direct. Into this growing tension steps a young sovereign with a sense of duty rooted in tradition. He inherits not only the throne, but also the full weight of a society pulled between old certainties and modern pressures. His decisions will determine whether the empire steadies itself or fractures under its own transformation. Crowded railway platforms fill with workers at dawn, each heading toward factories where the pace of production has grown faster than the rhythm of daily life. These stations, once simple stops along regional lines, now resemble arteries feeding industrial centers that stretch far beyond their original boundaries. Everyone senses that the country has entered a volatile phase. Wages lag behind prices, strikes appear sporadically, and police patrols increase near workshops where discontent is strongest. Inside government ministries, reports detailing unrest arrive with growing regularity. Factory inspectors warn about unsafe machinery and cramped conditions. Provincial governors note the spread of underground pamphlets. Police officers intercept letters describing meetings held after dark in rented rooms. Some ministers argue for cautious reforms. Others demand harsh punishment. Each camp insists its approach will preserve order, but neither can fully address the scale of the pressure building across the empire. A major rupture begins far from the capital, in a war fought against an eastern rival with ambitions of its own. Leaders in St. Petersburg expected a swift campaign, believing the empire's size would overwhelm its opponent. Those expectations collapse almost immediately. Modern battleships are lost at sea, armies struggle to supply themselves, and communication lines break down. Newspapers hint at disasters that officials prefer to hide, while returning soldiers speak openly about shortages, confusion, and outdated command structures. Defeat abroad carries consequences at home. Families receive news of lost sons. Reservists resent chaotic mobilization, and factories tasked with supplying the army face impossible demands. Public frustration grows sharper, and the war becomes a symbol of everything society fears: incompetence, corruption, and the inability of the government to adapt to modern realities. Crowds gather outside administrative buildings, demanding explanations, while opposition groups interpret military failure as an opportunity to press for change. Strikes erupt in industrial centers. What begins as a wage dispute expands into a movement demanding political representation, safer working conditions, and a voice in national decisions. Workers march through city streets carrying banners painted hastily the night before. Students join them, followed by teachers, clerks, and artisans. Police forces attempt to disperse the crowds, but the number of demonstrators grows too quickly to contain without escalating violence. In the capital, tension reaches a breaking point when an unarmed procession moves toward the Winter Palace, hoping to deliver a petition. People carry icons, portraits of the ruler, and appeals written in plain, respectful language. They believe the sovereign will hear their grievances if only they can reach him directly. Instead, soldiers block the route, panic spreads, and shots ring out. The incident shocks the empire. Supporters of reform speak of betrayal. Conservative officials insist order had to be maintained. Whichever interpretation people choose, trust in the government fractures irreparably. After this tragedy, the ruler confronts unrest more widespread than any he has faced before. Rail workers, textile laborers, and miners organize strikes that paralyze entire regions. Peasants seize land from local estates, refusing to obey officials who arrive to enforce old orders. Students boycott classes and form discussion groups that border on revolutionary cells. Even soldiers in some garrisons begin questioning orders, unsettled by the stories returning from the war and the unrest at home. Advisors urge decisive action, warning that hesitation will only embolden opposition groups. Some recommend constitutional concessions, believing limited reform might restore confidence. Others advocate mass arrests and expanded military control. Each option carries risks. Reform may alienate conservative nobles, while repression could provoke the very uprising the government seeks to avoid. After weeks of debate, the ruler announces measures meant to calm the empire. A new legislative body will be formed, and elected representatives will participate in shaping law. Newspapers celebrate the announcement, crowds cheer in the streets, and activists hope they have forced the state to adopt a more open political system. For a brief moment, it appears that compromise might restore balance. Implementation, however, proves more complex than the promise. The new assembly receives authority on paper, but finds its powers limited in practice. Ministers retain control over key decisions, and bureaucrats interpret laws narrowly, restricting the assembly's influence. Debates flare inside its halls, as representatives complain they were invited to participate without being allowed to govern. Public enthusiasm fades, as people realize how tightly the government guards its authority. During this uneasy transition, radical groups continue organizing. Underground presses print manifestos, calling for complete transformation of the political system. Calls for equality, land redistribution, and national self-determination spread among various ethnic groups within the empire. Local officials struggle to suppress these movements while dealing with rising crime, economic instability, and shortages of essential goods. Armed clashes erupt in several cities as militant factions attempt to seize government buildings or ambush police patrols. Although the state suppresses these uprisings, the events highlight the depth of unrest and the weakening authority of local administrators. Each confrontation demands additional troops, placing further strain on military resources already stretched thin by the recent war. Inside the palace, the ruler grows increasingly isolated. He trusts only a small circle of advisors and relies heavily on his family and personal confidence. Letters from his mother, wife, and influential courtiers shape his perceptions of the crisis. Meanwhile, officials outside this inner circle struggle to convey the severity of unrest in the provinces, fearing they will be dismissed or punished for bringing uncomfortable news. Attempts to stabilize the empire continue. Agrarian reforms are proposed to address rural grievances, but implementation moves slowly. Industrial regulations are drafted but delayed by bureaucratic disputes. Policing strategies shift repeatedly as authorities experiment with harsher or more lenient approaches. Each change seems to address one problem while deepening another. Despite these efforts, the underlying structure of the state remains fragile. Factories continue expanding, trains continue crossing vast distances, and cities continue growing. Yet political institutions lag behind the demands of a modernizing society. The tension between rapid economic transformation and rigid political authority becomes the central struggle of the era. By the end of this turbulent decade, the empire appears outwardly intact but inwardly unsettled. Strikes no longer surprise anyone. Underground groups operate despite constant surveillance. Newspapers, though censored, hint at looming confrontation. The new legislative body debates vigorously, yet remains constrained. Even loyal citizens sense that stability is running out. When a global conflict erupts shortly afterward, the empire enters it burdened by unresolved tensions. Mobilization begins on an immense scale, but soldiers march to the front carrying doubts about the government's competence. Families send sons to war, unsure whether they fight for a cause or merely out of obligation. Factories work day and night to produce weapons, yet many workers feel no loyalty to the system demanding their labor. The storm gathering on the horizon will strain every weakness exposed during this era. What began as scattered dissent has evolved into a deep structural crisis, one that no single reform, decree, or crackdown can resolve. Gunmetal trains roll out of crowded stations, carrying men who only months earlier were factory workers, students, farmhands, or clerks. Mobilization unfolds with dizzying speed, pulling entire communities into a conflict few understand beyond rumors of alliances and distant ultimatums. Streets fill with families waving farewell, unsure when they will see their loved ones again. Patriotic speeches echo across public squares, yet beneath the cheering lies a tension that many sense but cannot fully articulate. The empire enters the war with faith in its size, its endurance, and its past victories. But no amount of confidence can mask the weaknesses long concealed beneath its surface. Frontier fortresses receive their first reports of fighting within days. Initial engagements against a familiar Western rival go better than expected. Russian forces push forward, crossing into contested territory and capturing several towns before defenders can fully organize. Officers wire the capital describing disciplined advances and early successes. Newspapers publish optimistic summaries, and morale surges. For a brief moment, the nation believes it can shape the conflict on its own terms. Optimism fades when troops meet the armies of the Central Power to the northwest. Experienced commanders on the enemy side understand how to exploit speed, precision, and modern artillery. Their counterattack hits with crushing force. Russian units, stretched thin across forests and marshlands, struggle to coordinate. Orders arrive late or contradict one another. Soldiers, unfamiliar with trench warfare, attempt frontal assaults that end in devastating losses. What seemed a manageable campaign suddenly reveals the empire's lack of preparedness. In field hospitals established behind the front, doctors face an unending stream of wounded. Supplies run low, and medical staff improvise with whatever they have. Letters from these facilities describe conditions that shock families waiting at home. Wounded soldiers recount chaotic retreats, abandoned equipment, and commanders who could not adapt quickly enough to modern conflict. These stories spread across villages and cities, eroding trust in military leadership. As the enemy pushes deeper into imperial territory, defensive lines shift repeatedly. Entire divisions fall back through forests thick with mud, their uniforms stiff with frost and exhaustion. Supply trains lag miles behind, struggling across damaged rails. Ammunition shortages become chronic. Commanders know they must hold certain positions to prevent catastrophe, yet they cannot reinforce them quickly enough. Each withdrawal leaves civilians exposed to occupation, forcing families to flee with whatever they can carry. The scale of losses becomes impossible to hide. Telegrams announcing casualties arrive daily, flooding post offices with grieving relatives. Churches conduct funerals every week, bells tolling endlessly in towns far from the front. Women take jobs previously reserved for men, filling factories and supply depots in attempts to keep the war effort afloat. Even children join the labor force, carrying water to workshops or stitching uniforms late into the night. Inside the capital, officials meet in hall after hall, attempting to interpret the crisis. Some believe the army must retreat deeper and regroup. Others argue for new offensives to prevent the enemy from dictating the pace of war. The ruler grows increasingly anxious, torn between faith in his commanders and fear that the empire is spiraling beyond his control. Advisors offer conflicting plans, each claiming urgency. In the end, he makes a decision that astonishes nearly everyone. He will take personal command of the army. His presence on the front is meant to inspire unity and discipline. Instead, it creates a vacuum in the capital. While he rides along trenches, visits regiments, and issues directives from icy headquarters, the seat of government falls largely to his family and close entourage. Ministers, accustomed to receiving orders directly from the throne, now find themselves negotiating with courtiers who lack both administrative experience and political stability. Decisions once made promptly now drag on for days or weeks. Meanwhile, the army's condition deteriorates further. Winter storms freeze rifles, immobilize artillery, and turn roads into treacherous ice soldiers huddle in makeshift shelters, sharing rations never meant to sustain them through months of stalemate. Messages from the front grow increasingly bleak. Some units report desertions. Others claim to have lost half their strength in a single engagement. Commanders plead for reinforcements, ammunition, and medical supplies. But shortages plague every level of the logistical network. In villages near the front, civilians face brutal hardship. Bread becomes scarce. Livestock is requisitioned by both armies. And epidemics sweep through communities lacking medicine. Refugees crowd into train stations hoping to reach safer towns. But transportation bottlenecks leave many stranded for days. The sense of crisis becomes palpable, and local authorities struggle to maintain order amid rising desperation. Farther from the battlefield, major cities begin to feel the pressure. Food shipments arrive irregularly and prices climb quickly. Long lines form outside bakeries before dawn. Factories producing weapons operate non-stop, yet workers complain that their wages cannot keep pace with inflation. Strikes flare in industrial districts despite strict regulations. Police patrols increase, but unrest grows too quickly to suppress through conventional measures. Within aristocratic circles, confidence in the government collapses. Some nobles blame the ruler's decision to command the army. Others criticize the influence of certain court figures, whom they perceive as manipulating policy for personal gain. Ministers attempt to present a united front, but their disagreements leak into the press, fueling rumors and resentment. Railway stations become sites of constant tension. Troop trains heading toward the front pass caravans of wounded soldiers returning from it. Civilians cluster around bulletin boards seeking updates, but official reports tell less and less of the truth. As the gap widens between official statements and lived experience, faith in the state's competence erodes. By the third year of the war, the empire's position becomes dire. Ammunition factories cannot keep pace with demand. Horses die from overwork. Entire units fight with outdated rifles. Soldiers write home, confessing doubts about the cause for which they suffer. Their families echo these doubts, whispering in cramped kitchens and crowded marketplaces that the empire cannot endure much longer at this pace. Rumors begin circulating about unrest among frontline units. Some regiments refuse orders. Others demand better supplies before returning to the trenches. Officers speak privately of mutinies waiting to ignite. High command sends additional troops to troubled sectors, but these reinforcements arrive exhausted and poorly equipped. The crisis reaches deep into the heart of the empire. In the capital, transportation networks collapse under the strain. Coal shortages force factories to pause production. Grain shipments spoil before reaching city markets. Lines outside bakeries stretch around city blocks. Hunger spreads quickly among working families, and tempers flare in public squares, where people gather to complain about shortages that no official can solve. Meanwhile, the ruler remains at the front, increasingly isolated from the realities unfolding in his own capital. Dispatches reach him describing protests, strikes, and rising anger. But he clings to the belief that victory remains possible if the army can regroup. His advisors try to convince him that the crisis requires immediate attention in the capital, yet he hesitates, torn between loyalty to his troops and fear of abandoning them during the worst phase of the war. As another winter descends, entire communities feel the weight of collapse. Families face hunger, soldiers approach rebellion, and administrators admit in private that the state is losing control of the situation. Each passing month deepens the sense that the empire stands on the edge of a precipice, held together only by routine, exhaustion, and the hope that something, anything, might change. A turning point arrives when the capital's workers, burdened by shortages and emboldened by years of unrest, gather in large numbers to demand relief. The protest spreads faster than officials can respond. Factories shut down. Streetcars seize up. Crowds fill central avenues shouting for bread, peace, and dignity. Some soldiers dispatched to maintain order join the demonstrators, refusing to fire on civilians. What began as a protest against hunger grows into an open challenge to the state itself. Frontline failures, domestic hardship, and political paralysis converge into a national crisis with no clear solution. Every institution, the army, the ministries, the courts, the police, the nobility, feels strain beyond its limits. The empire, once confident in its size and endurance, now teeters in a moment where survival depends on decisions no one seems capable of making. Crowds press into the streets long before officials realize the scale of the unrest. Workers abandon their factories. Women leave bread lines to join the demonstrations, and students spill out of lecture halls to follow the shouting masses moving toward the city center. By midday, tram lines stop running, shopkeepers shutter their doors, and smoke rises from scattered bonfires lit to keep protesters warm in the freezing wind. What began as frustration over food shortages transforms into a citywide strike, unraveling the final threads of imperial authority. Inside government buildings, ministers argue over how to respond. Some demand immediate repression, insisting that only force can restore control. Others warn that the army's loyalty cannot be assumed, especially with so many soldiers exhausted by years at the front. Reports confirm their fears. Infantry units ordered to disperse crowds hesitate, then refuse, and in several cases openly join the demonstrators. Officers try to regain command, but their orders carry no weight against the overwhelming mood of revolt that has taken hold among the ranks. While the capital dissolves into chaos, the ruler remains far away at military headquarters. Telegraph messages reach him in fragments, each one worse than the last. Advisors plead for his return, urging him to confront the crisis personally. After days of hesitation, he boards a train, heading toward the capital, convinced that his presence will restore order. The journey becomes a series of delays. Tracks are blocked by striking railway workers, and signals remain unanswered. At several stops, soldiers greet the imperial carriage with uncertainty rather than loyalty. His confidence erodes as each mile passes. Back in the city, the imperial government effectively ceases to function. Cabinet members resign or flee. Police officials lock themselves inside their offices or abandon their posts altogether. Members of the legislature, sensing that the moment has surpassed their authority, organize emergency committees to coordinate essential services and negotiate with protest leaders. Their goal is simple: prevent the capital from collapsing entirely before a political solution can be found. Across factory districts and residential neighborhoods, citizens form their own councils to address immediate needs. Some coordinate the distribution of bread and coal. Others organize protection patrols to prevent looting or violence. These improvised bodies appear almost overnight, filling the vacuum left by a government that no longer commands obedience. Their existence demonstrates how completely the old order has lost contact with the people it claims to govern. Within the Winter Palace, only a small contingent of officials remains. They attempt to gather documents, secure valuables, and maintain a semblance of routine. But the sound of crowds outside makes each hour feel increasingly precarious. Rumors spread that protesters will storm the building. Others claim mutinous soldiers will seize it before civilians can. Throughout the city, the royal family's safety becomes a subject of anxious debate, even among those who once opposed the dynasty. On the front lines, news of the unrest spreads faster than official orders. Soldiers who endured years of shortage and sacrifice learn that their families are hungry, their cities paralyzed, and their government collapsing. Some units abandon their positions, choosing to return home rather than fight a war for a system that no longer exists. Officers attempt to maintain discipline, but face the same exhaustion and frustration as their men. Each day sees the erosion of structures that once held the army together. The ruler's train never reaches the capital. At a remote railway junction, generals and politicians intercept him, presenting a stark assessment. They explain that the situation has moved beyond protest and has become a revolution threatening national collapse. Several urge him to abdicate in hopes of saving the state. They argue that continuing to cling to power will only deepen the crisis and invite the dissolution of the entire empire. Faced with disaster on every front, he hesitates. For years, he believed that preservation of the dynasty depended on steadfastness, not concession. Now even his closest advisors insist that remaining on the throne is impossible. Messages from the capital confirm the extent of the rebellion, describing soldiers siding with demonstrators, police stations abandoned, and government ministries occupied by provisional committees. He reads each report in silence, torn between duty, identity, and the realization that events have outpaced any hope of recovery. Eventually, he signs the document ending centuries of Romanov rule. His decision arrives not with ceremony, but with weary resignation. The signed abdication is carried back to the capital by rail, passing through stations crowded with soldiers, civilians, and curious onlookers who sense that history is shifting in real time. Once the news spreads, crowds gather in squares, not to celebrate a single faction's victory, but to witness the conclusion of an era they believed might last forever. With the monarchy dissolved, political authority shifts immediately, to the provisional government assembled from members of the legislature and representatives of emerging civic groups. Their first challenge is to assert control over a society undergoing spontaneous transformation. They issue declarations promising civil liberties, political participation, and an end to arbitrary rule. Newspapers print these announcements with an enthusiasm unseen in decades. Yet optimism is tempered by uncertainty. No one knows whether these new leaders can stabilize the country, let alone rebuild it during wartime. Short-lived unity begins to fray almost as soon as it forms. Moderate politicians hope to continue the war to honor alliances and preserve Russia's standing workers and soldiers. Exhausted by years of sacrifice, demand immediate peace. Peasants want land reform, deserters want amnesty, and national minorities seek autonomy. The provisional government attempts to address these competing demands, but lacks the authority or stability to satisfy any group completely. On the streets of the capital, new committees of workers and soldiers gain influence rapidly. Their meetings attract thousands seeking a political voice denied for generations. Speakers debate every aspect of state governance: war, land, wages, and representation. Some argue that the provisional government is incapable of delivering true change. Others call for patience. All agree that the old autocracy cannot return. The royal family, now removed from power, faces an uncertain future. Guards assigned to protect them follow orders, but loyalty is mixed. Some feel sympathy, others resentment, and many are unsure what the coming months will bring. Rumors circulate about relocation, exile, or trial. Decisions regarding their fate shift from one authority to another as the new government struggles to establish a coherent policy. Meanwhile, frontline regiments continue dissolving. Soldiers elect representatives to negotiate conditions with officers, often refusing to engage in new offensives. Entire battalions abandon trenches, walking away from the war that consumed their youth. Supplies pile up unused, and artillery pieces sit silent in frozen positions. Command structures collapse, leaving generals unable to issue meaningful orders. In rural areas, the absence of central authority opens opportunities for long-delayed action. Villagers seize estates, divide fields, and challenge long-standing hierarchies. Local officials plead for guidance from the provisional government, but responses arrive slowly or not at all. Each village improvises solutions, creating a patchwork of local revolutions that transform the countryside without coordination or oversight. The capital remains the crucible of the crisis. Mass meetings take place daily in factories, barracks, and public squares. Bold proposals circulate in underground newspapers, challenging the provisional government's legitimacy. Rival political factions grow more organized as they compete for support from workers, soldiers, and peasants. Alliances shift rapidly, and each day brings new arguments, debates, and protests. Attempts to restore order falter. Ministers resign, coalitions collapse, and key institutions remain paralyzed. Food remains scarce. Inflation spirals, strikes intensify. Desertions increase. Authorities issue decrees they cannot enforce, watching as their influence shrinks with each passing week. By summer, the empire has effectively dissolved into a landscape of clashing authorities, exhausted armies, and anxious civilians. The monarchy is gone. The provisional government struggles to command even the capital. Revolutionary committees gain strength but cannot unify the country. The state that once stretched across continents now feels directionless, suspended between collapse and transformation. Nothing remains of the old structure but memory, and the awareness that whatever comes next will reshape the future more profoundly than anyone yet understands.